The scene opens with a well-dressed man meticulously preparing to leave his home. Suddenly, a group of mysterious figures bursts in, abducting him without warning. We flash back to 1955, New York City, where two boys, Frankie and Winston, are being arrested for arson. As they face police interrogation, Frankie urgently instructs his younger brother not to say anything. He insists that he will take the blame for everything. The weight of Frankie's resolve is clear. He is ready to bear the fall. Consequences for Winston's actions. Winston, overwhelmed with fear, can only sit and cry. True to Frankie's wishes, he takes on the full burden of blame and is sentenced to prison, while Winston is left unscathed. Years later, America finds itself in the grips of a financial crisis. Shrouded in darkness and despair, crime, corruption, and neglect have turned the streets into a perilous landscape. Frankie and Winston have grown up, but their paths have diverged dramatically. Though Frankie has served time, he emerges as a sought-after figure in the underworld. As Frankie enters a bustling bar, patrons call out his name, celebrating him as a hero of sorts. Yet, amidst the admiration, Cormac, a powerful figure in the criminal world, mocks Frankie, announcing that he pulled him up from the depths of society. Frankie, unfazed by the ridicule, simply nods to the crowd before exiting, leaving a tip for the nearby sex workers. Outside, he makes his way to a train station, waiting for the drunks and addicts to disperse. Now, only Frankie and one of his associates remain. Frankie and his associate quickly descended onto the train tracks, retrieving a ladder to pry open a manhole cover above them, directly beneath the bar where Frankie had just been. They cleverly attached a hook to the heavy iron cover, timing their move to coincide with the passing train. As the train thundered by, the momentum allowed them to lift cover, revealing a hidden passageway. They slipped into the secret room, and Frankie's accomplice was awestruck by the sight of numerous barrels filled with gold and valuable items. However, Frankie remained unfazed. His focus was drawn to an ancient coin minting machine nestled among the treasures. Just as Frankie contemplated the successful completion of their mission, his partner suddenly turned on him, aiming a gun at Frankie and demanding the coveted artifact. Betrayed, Frankie fired a burst of bullets. The gunfire echoed ominously, alerting Cormac's henchmen to their location. Sensing the imminent danger, Frankie quickly shot out a gas line, igniting a chaotic explosion that provided him a brief window to escape. Despite the odds, Cormac's men were relentless and well-coordinated, swiftly closing in on Frankie. He found himself cornered, clutching the precious artifact in one hand and a pistol in the other. Drawing on the skills he had honed since childhood, Frankie evaded their gunfire with remarkable agility. Bullets whizzed past him, but he danced around the onslaught, using the environment to his advantage. With deadly precision, Frankie's marksmanship shone through as he dispatched several of Cormac's thugs, each shot carefully aimed and executed. After a tense chase, Frankie finally made it outside, only to find one of Cormac's henchmen hot on his heels. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, a taxi careened into the scene, colliding with the thug and providing Frankie a momentary reprieve. The driver of the taxi was none other than Yin, Frankie's beloved wife. With her timely intervention, they managed to escape. Meanwhile, Winston was living a life distinct from the one his brother had sacrificed for. After years of hard work and dedication, he had become a wealthy businessman in England. That day, he was set to meet with potential investors to secure funding for his ambitious project. However, the man he was meeting was no ordinary investor. Davenport was one of the wealthiest traders of the time. Winston pitched his idea of building parking facilities for the rapidly rising skyscrapers, a concept that held promise but lacked the backing of a reputable name. Davenport, unimpressed by Winston's current stature, seemed ready to dismiss the proposal. But just as Winston sensed that the negotiation was about to fall through, he mentioned that Tony, a major player in the business world, was also interested in investing. The mention of Tony changed the dynamics of the meeting. Davenport's interest was piqued. Tony was not someone whose investment could be easily dismissed. Almost immediately, Davenport instructed his wife to get Tony on the phone for a direct confirmation. Once it was established that Tony was indeed willing to invest in Winston's venture, Davenport made the decision. Davenport, at that time convinced of Winston's credibility, agreed to transfer the funds for the project. With the financing secured, Winston returned to his hotel to meet his lover, none other than Davenport's wife. The two had conspired together from the outset to swindle a significant sum from Davenport. That night, they celebrated their success with fervor, reveling in their triumph. However, the next morning, as Winston prepared to leave the hotel, a group of masked assailants attacked him. In a desperate bid to escape, he rushed toward the exit, only to be intercepted by a hotel staff member who injected him with a tranquilizer. Within moments, he collapsed, and the mysterious figures whisked him away to America. Meanwhile, at the Continental Hotel in the U.S., Cormac was dealing with the fallout from losing his prized possession. In a fit of rage, he forced one of his bodyguards, who had failed to retrieve the item, to jump out of a window. As punishment, Winston, now awake and disoriented, witnessed the grim scene unfold before him. Brought inside to meet Cormac, Winston learned the reason for his abduction. Cormac revealed that Frankie had stolen something of immense value, and since he could not locate Frankie, he needed Winston's help to track him down. Winston feigned ignorance, stating that he and Frankie had not been in contact for years, but Cormac was uninterested in excuses. With a menacing demeanor, Cormac warned Winston that if he failed to find Frankie, the consequences would be dire. He made it clear that Winston should not underestimate him. Powerful forces stood behind Cormac, ready to enforce his will. In a world where skyscrapers could vanish overnight without a trace, a darker scene unfolded in an abandoned building in America. A blonde thug was tying up a group of black individuals, brandishing a gun to intimidate them. Despite the perilous situation, the captives showed no fear. Instead, they warned the thug to be careful, suggesting that he might be the first to meet his end. Unfazed by their defiance, the blonde thug continued to taunt them, preparing to execute a black woman named Lou. However, at that critical moment, Miles, Lou's brother, burst onto the scene, firing back and severing several fingers from the thug's hand. The tide turned quickly. Once the thug's henchmen were dealt with, the group chose not to kill him, allowing him to escape with his severed fingers. As a message to his boss, the blonde thug, grateful yet fearful, scrambled to his car, unaware that he was being watched by Detective KD, who had been monitoring the entire situation. Once he sped off, KD pursued him, informing her colleague Mayhew of her intent to enter the Continental Hotel for surveillance. Mayhew cautioned KD against this reckless decision, warning her of the inherent dangers of acting alone. Meanwhile, after their successful rescue, Lou and Miles were driving home, tensions rising in the car. Miles was insistent on pursuing a risky job to earn money, but Lou vehemently opposed the idea. Their argument escalated, and in frustration, Lou demanded to be let out of the car. After his tense meeting with Cormac, Winston was finally released to search for Frankie. Though Cormac's men would be shadowing him closely, the long-awaited reunion with his Uncle Charlie filled both with joy. After exchanging warm greetings, Winston inquired about Frankie, but Charlie hadn't seen him in months and could only share rumors that Frankie was hiding out in a Chinese neighborhood. Desperate to find his brother before Cormac's men could reach him, Winston asked Charlie to borrow a car. Initially reluctant, Charlie eventually relented, reluctantly handing over his cherished vehicle after Winston's earnest pleading. However, Charlie insisted that Winston protect the car at all costs and cover it with a tarp whenever he parked. To ensure his safety, Charlie also handed Winston a pistol. Winston didn't want to take it, but fearing it would waste time, he nodded in agreement. Immediately after, he drove to the place his uncle said Frankie might be living, but it seemed that the karate class wasn't active, as it was so empty that no one was inside except Lou and Miles. There, Frankie met Lou's brothers, who were the owners of the dojo. Lou wanted to keep the class running because it was something her father had left behind, but her brother, Miles, wanted to sell it since, to him, it was now useless. Lou noticed someone had come to the house, went outside, and found Winston standing there waiting. After being invited in and greeting him, Winston explained the purpose of his visit was to find someone named Frankie. But as soon as Lou heard the name Frankie, her expression immediately changed to one of anger, and she wanted to throw Winston out. He realized that Lou must know something related to his brother, so he pointed a gun at her to threaten her. Lou, seeing the gun, pretended to obediently comply with him. She then led Winston down to the basement. Once there, taking advantage of the moment when he wasn't paying attention, Lou and Miles quickly grabbed Winston's gun and put him at a disadvantage. It turned out that Lou and Miles had worked with Frankie before because he was quite skilled in fighting, and the group had trusted him enough to work with them. Not only that, but their relationship was good, having fought together many times. However, during one mission, Frankie suddenly disappeared, and this had caused their money-making venture to fail. Later, Lou and Miles heard that Frankie had met a foreign woman and moved to live somewhere else. They also heard rumors that Frankie had gotten himself into some trouble in New York. Upon hearing this, Winston realized that the trouble Frankie was in was stealing from Cormac and being chased by him. Furthermore, this trouble also involved Winston. Lou's brothers added that it wasn't just Winston who was looking for Frankie, but many others were also trying to find him. Finding Frankie was like chasing a ghost. He appeared only when he wanted to be found. Winston understood that his best chance of locating Frankie lay in the Alphabet District. Before leaving, Miles handed Winston a better gun to replace the one Charlie had given him, emphasizing the need for protection in the dangerous world they inhabited. Unbeknownst to them, a suspicious man lurking in the distance was watching Winston's every move. He was one of Cormac's men, tasked with keeping tabs on Winston as he ventured into the unknown. In a different part of the city, a mysterious masked woman was tortured torturing one of Frankie's associates, the man who had been with Frankie when he stole the ancient coin minting machine. The thug was being pummeled mercilessly by a towering henchman, his face becoming unrecognizable under the brutal assaults. Despite the relentless beating, the woman couldn't extract any useful information. The thug insisted he was merely an accomplice and had no idea where Frankie had run off to after the heist. His primary interest had been the gold, and he was furious that Frankie had ruined his plans. The masked woman was skeptical. She signaled for her men to continue the torture, determined to break him. The thug's suffering was a grim reminder of the cost of betrayal, as he endured further pain for the secrets Frankie had taken with him. Meanwhile, KD, ignoring Mayhew's warnings, stepped into the Continental hotel. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and she quickly sensed that something was off. The staff moved with an alertness that suggested they were prepared for anything, their weapons concealed but ready. Realizing she had entered a perilous environment, KD decided to leave before she attracted unwanted attention. On this side, after hearing Miles' advice, Winston went to Alphabet to find his brother. However, before Winston could find his brother, he was about to be hanged by his sister-in-law from the ceiling. Luckily, Frankie arrived just in time and, recognizing Winston as his younger brother, lowered him down. If he had been a few minutes late, Winston would have been dead. Frankie was very surprised to see Winston here and asked why Winston wasn't back in England trading and instead came here. Winston replied that if it weren't for Frankie, he wouldn't have come back here repeatedly to be threatened with his life. He then told Frankie that he had been captured by Cormac's men, brought from England to America, just to force Winston to find Frankie's whereabouts. Upon hearing this, his sister-in-law realized that their hideout had been compromised, as Cormac's men were surely following Winston. When he arrived, they must have already been outside. Yen was not happy to see Winston, but Winston had no other choice. If he didn't act, not only would Frankie continue being hunted by them, but Winston's life would also be in danger. Frankie also mentioned that Winston's coming here was a mistake, but Winston said that he had a lot of money and could offer it to buy Frankie's life. However, Frankie understood Cormac better than anyone, as he had worked with him for many years and knew how he operated. After that, they began to plan an escape as the place was no longer safe. Winston and his brother used his Uncle Charlie's tarp to cover another car, hoping to mislead Cormac's men. Then they quietly took another route. By the time Cormac's men discovered Winston and Frankie's family had already gotten far away, Yen still couldn't calm her anger, as she believed it was Winston who had caused their hideout to be discovered. Winston said that they would go to Uncle Charlie's place to be safe. Frankie asked his younger brother why, when they were freed, he didn't run away, but came here instead. Winston replied that because Frankie was his brother, he couldn't leave him behind. Frankie was his only family, and he didn't want him to get hurt. Eventually, they arrived safely at Uncle Charlie's house. However, Yen was not convinced. She didn't trust Winston, so she didn't enter the house but stood outside to keep watch, ensuring no one would appear suddenly to harm them. Meanwhile, at Cormac's office, his subordinate reported that they had failed to capture Frankie. Realizing his men were useless, Cormac ordered them to find the eccentric twins, as they were professional assassins. Soon after, the eccentric twins, who were free at the time, agreed to take the job. At Uncle Charlie's house, Winston scolded Frankie, asking why, even though he had a wife, he never told her about his younger brother, and why, when Frankie went to prison, he didn't let Winston visit, and when he got out, he didn't contact Winston. They were just orphans, relying on each other to survive. But Winston never understood why his brother kept avoiding him and pushed him out of his life. In response to his younger brother's many questions, Frankie only said that it was the best way for Winston to have a new life, a normal life. He didn't want his brother to get involved in the dirty and dark things that Frankie had gone through. He wanted the best for Winston. Cutting off all contact with him was the only way Frankie could show his care for his brother. He said that one day, Winston would understand that everything he did today was for his younger brother. Good. It seemed like they would be safe here, but someone at Charlie's house had revealed Frankie's hiding place to Cormac. Soon after, while Winston was talking to his brother in the car, they were startled by a gunshot from Yen. It turned out that the victim had intended to kill the Frankie brothers, but fortunately for them, Yen was still outside the car, so she spotted him and took him out before he could act. However, at this point, they had been exposed. Cormac's men had already arrived, heavily armed, ready to take action. Winston drove Uncle Charlie's car away, with Yen sitting in the back. She used her machine gun to fire wildly at the enemies. Suddenly, the car lost control and crashed into some metal barrels by the roadside, flipping over several times. The assassins quickly surrounded the car and opened fire on it, but to their surprise, the three of them had already left. They ran toward a building where a helicopter was waiting for them. As they made it up several floors, assassins followed behind. The eccentric twins had also arrived and were looking for a good good position to carry out killing. When they reached the top floor, Yen took a different route to mislead the attackers, but only one of them followed her. Yin, on the run, found an open house and slipped inside to hide temporarily. Outside, Frankie and Winston were engaged in a fierce battle against a group of assassins. Unfortunately, Winston, being just a businessman, was quickly overpowered and knocked out cold. In stark contrast, Frankie fought valiantly, skillfully dodging and countering attacks from both sides. However, fatigue began to set in, and one of the attackers still stood, aiming his weapon at Frankie. Just as the assassin was about to pull the trigger, Winston regained consciousness. With quick reflexes, he grabbed the gun and fired, saving Frankie's life in the nick of time. The tide of the battle shifted, but the fight was far from over. Meanwhile, the thug hunting Yin had picked up her trail, discovering blood on the doorknob of the apartment where she was hiding. Suspecting she was inside, he barged in, only to find Yin desperately trying to protect a small child in the room. Determined not to let the child come to harm, Yin fought back against her assailant while skillfully avoiding any attacks aimed at the innocent. The struggle escalated. Furniture was knocked over. In a stroke of luck, she spotted an iron and quickly seized it. She wrapped the cord tightly around the thug's neck. Yin's decisive blow with the iron struck the thug squarely on the head, taking him out of the fight for good. With the immediate threat neutralized, Frankie, Winston, and Yin believed they had finally secured their safety. They rushed to the rooftop where a helicopter awaited, ready to whisk them away from danger. However, unbeknownst to them, the twin assassins had been lying in wait. As the trio boarded the helicopter, the assassins sprang into action, shooting the pilot and injuring him to prevent their escape. Fortunately, the pilot managed to stay conscious enough to maintain control of the helicopter, but the situation was dire. As Winston and the couple made their way into the helicopter, the assassins continued to fire at them relentlessly. In that chaotic moment, Frankie realized the gravity of the situation. He was the target. The assassins were after him, not Yin or Winston. Understanding that he could not let them harm his loved ones, Frankie made a heart-wrenching decision. He bid farewell to Yin and Winston. Then, in a split second, he grabbed the minting machine and leaped from the helicopter. The shocking act left Yin and Winston in stunned silence, unable to react in time. As Frankie descended, he stood defiantly, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. The assassins took aim, and without hesitation, one of them fired a fatal shot that struck Frankie in the head. Winston and Yin watched in horror from above, helpless as the love and sacrifice unfolded beneath them. After Frankie's tragic death, Cormac believed he had finally obtained the coveted minting machine. However, when he opened the box, he was met with disappointment. It was a mere decoy, a clever ruse that had cost him dearly. Flashing back to 1955 in New York, young Frankie and Winston were tasked with a mission from Cormac. Frankie handed Winston a gas canister with a cloth soaked in oil, instructing him to be careful with the fire. Frankie lit the cloth and signaled for Winston to throw the canister into a nearby fashion store. What Frankie hadn't anticipated was that there were still people inside. As Frankie dashed ahead, Winston froze in fear, unable to move. Realizing his younger brother was still standing there, Frankie turned back, grasped Winston's hand, and pulled him along, igniting memories of their childhood. This moment marked their first reunion after years apart, and now, with Frankie gone, Winston was left to grapple with an overwhelming sense of loss. The only remnants of Frankie were a few small items, some coins, and a necklace. Winston carefully took them, fighting back his emotions as he prepared for his brother's funeral. He spent a significant amount of money to bribe the morgue attendants, ensuring that Frankie would receive a proper cremation. After the ceremony, Winston took Frankie's ashes with him, painful reminder of the bond they once shared. Fast forward to 1973, Yin was carrying out a final suicide mission. Armed with a large bomb, she infiltrated a group of American soldiers, intending to detonate it and carry out her mission. However, as she pressed the activation button, the bomb malfunctioned and failed to explode. Amidst fear and utter confusion, she suddenly came across Frankie with a friendly smile on his face. This was what brought them together and led to where they were today. However, it was only a memory of the first time Yin and Frankie met. Now, when Yin woke up, she was injured and had to lie in bed for treatment. Frankie was no longer around. At Lu's place, a Chinese man came to see her and made a proposition that every store should have a tobacco stand for him. However, Lu did not agree to the proposal. The Chinese man didn't seem easy to negotiate with. He left, but not before warning her that Lu's father was dead and the laws he had put in place were no longer effective. Now, he had taken control of the place and the laws were his to decide. At the same time, at KD's private home, Mayhew had also come to see her. The two of them often had secret affairs there as Mayhew was married. He knew KD was still searching for Frankie. Now, Mayhew came to stop her from continuing, but KD wouldn't listen. She still wanted to get to the bottom of the matter. Just then, a phone call came, informing KD of news about Frankie. Upon hearing this, she immediately left her lover alone in the room. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, after cremating Frankie's body, Winston, along with Miles, returned to the karate dojo. On the way, Miles informed Winston that the box Frankie had been holding when he jumped had nothing inside. It was just a fake box. Upon arriving, they met Lou to discuss the issue. Winston told everyone that he wanted to avenge Frankie. He also mentioned that whatever Cormac was searching for was very important, as it could affect his reputation and position, which is why Cormac was so desperate to find the box. Losing Frankie meant that Cormac's position would be shaken. Winston saw this as an opportunity to eliminate Cormac and take over the Continental Hotel. He believed that by killing the old man, they could not only seize the hotel, but also capture Cormac's arms trafficking market, which would become a lucrative prize for the Lou siblings. Winston's idea was deemed insane by everyone around him, as no one had ever dared to think of such a thing. Until now, they had only considered ways to deal with and evade Cormac, never thinking about killing him. However, while it was easy to talk about, the execution was anything but simple. The group urged Winston not to engage with Cormac, warning him that he and his powerful backers were not to be trifled with. Despite their concerns, Winston remained confident. He claimed to know Cormac since childhood and understood how he operated and thought. Moreover, he had enough money to build an army at his disposal. As they discussed their plans next to Frankie's urn, Yin entered the room. Upon seeing Winston, she couldn't contain her rage. She hadn't consented to the cremation of Frankie, and despite Winston's explanations that he had no time and no other way to lay his brother to rest, his words did little to soothe Yin's grief. Yin believed that Winston was the reason for Frankie's death. If he didn't come, Cormac's men wouldn't have found him, and the tragic events might never have occurred. At the same time, KD had received information about Frankie and arrived at the morgue. However, when the box containing his remains was opened, it was empty. After some questioning, the morgue manager reluctantly revealed that Frankie's younger brother had bribed him with a large sum of money to cremate Frankie's body and take the ashes away. Beyond that, the manager had no additional information to provide. Frustrated at not obtaining anything valuable, KD decided to leave. On Cormac's side, after failing to retrieve the minting machine, he was confronted by the masked woman who came to remind him of his shortcomings. Unhappy with his performance, she personally informed Cormac that he had 3 days to recover the minting machine. If he failed, she would strip him of his position. Despite his notorious cruelty and power, Cormac was sweating profusely in her presence, indicating that the masked woman was not to be trifled with. Meanwhile, Winston and his group were still strategizing on how to take down Cormac. They knew he was not an easy opponent, and with just a few of them, success seemed unlikely. Thus, Winston's team began searching for allies. When they asked Miles about potential contacts, he mentioned that most of his friends had retired to normal lives and wanted nothing to do with the criminal underworld. However, Lou suddenly recalled someone named Jenkins. Jenkins was a retired sniper who still took contracts for kills. He was a friend of Lou's father and had previously rented a room at the Continental Hotel, which meant he likely knew the place quite well. The next potential ally they considered was Maisie, a crime lord with a formidable army capable of taking on Cormac. Her power was substantial enough that even Cormac dared not cross her. Miles went to visit Jenkins, who lived alone and enjoyed tending to his plants rather than seeking a wife. Jenkins understood that no woman would want to marry a hitman, so he chose a solitary life, happily pursuing his passion without affecting anyone else's life. When Miles met Jenkins, he pretended to simply be there for a friendly visit. However, just as he was about to leave, Jenkins called him back. Miles sensed that his uncle had figured out the real reason for his visit. He turned around with a mysterious smile, trying to play it cool, but Jenkins wasn't easily fooled. Having known Miles since he was a child, Jenkins recognized that something was amiss. Although Miles didn't explain everything outright, Jenkins, as a figure from the underworld and a former friend of Miles's father, had kept an eye on Lou and Miles's lives over the years. After learning that they were dealing with Cormac, Jenkins willingly offered to help eliminate him. With his support, they successfully gained another ally for their cause. Meanwhile, Winston took on the task of persuading Maisie. He arranged to meet her at a busy restaurant to gauge her influence. To test her power, he slammed a meat cleaver down onto the table. Instantly, Maisie's men surrounding him aimed their guns at Winston, demonstrating that her reputation was indeed well-founded. Winston initially thought to bribe Maisie, but she made it clear that money was not an issue for her. Born into an aristocratic family, she valued love above wealth, so offering her cash would not sway her. If Winston wanted to hire her, she needed to know who the target was and why. Without hesitation, Winston revealed that he wanted to kill Cormac because he had murdered his brother. Just then, one of Maisie's henchmen interrupted, informing her that someone was causing trouble, those looking for Winston. However, before Cormac's men could make a move, they were swiftly dealt with. Despite Winston's efforts, he was unable to convince Maisie and had to leave empty-handed. empty-handed. In a new scene, Cormac, shaken by the masked woman's threats, quickly sent his men to retrieve the minting machine. The eccentric twins also joined the search, heading to Uncle Charlie's house and turning it upside down in their quest. However, they found nothing. Even the car outside was vandalized, but they still came up empty-handed. After finding nothing at Uncle Charlie's, Cormac's men moved to an abandoned movie theater where Frankie had once lived. Inside, Yin was grappling with the pain of Frankie's sudden death. Hearing noises outside, she quietly stepped out and spotted Cormac's henchmen searching the area for the lost item. Without hesitation, Yin shot one of them. The gunfire drew the attention of the others, who began firing into suspicious areas. Despite their overwhelming numbers, Yin launched a surprise attack, taking them down one by one. Meanwhile, Cormac held a meeting with his men in a church. Frustrated with their lack of progress over the past 3 days, he dismissed them for being ineffective. Not only had they failed to find the object, but they had also lost several men. Their incompetence left Cormac feeling humiliated for having employed them. As everyone left, only Charon, Cormac's loyal bodyguard, remained. On another front, Winston became increasingly eager to secure Maisie's cooperation after witnessing her wealth and influence. However, he still felt uncertain about his ability to persuade her, especially since she had no interest in money. In this tense situation, Yin appeared. Although she still held Winston responsible for Frankie's indirect death, she understood their shared desire for revenge. To aid their cause, she brought them a map belonging to her late husband. Frankie had redrawn the map of the Continental Hotel by Cormac. It wasn't a perfect map, but at that moment, it was a treasure for Winston's side, as it allowed them to navigate the hotel. With this map, they could navigate the hotel, and when compared with Jenkins's knowledge, it proved to be quite accurate. The hotel served not only as accommodation but also as Cormac's operational headquarters, housing everything from administrative offices to a weapons cache for defense against attacks or police raids. Recognizing the situation, Winston devised a plan to find a spy within the Continental Hotel. Meanwhile, at Mayhew's house, he was enjoying time with his wife and children when KD arrived unannounced. Upon seeing her, Mayhew panicked. Fearing that KD might expose their illicit relationship, he hesitated to let her inside, but KD used his vulnerability against him, pressuring him to gather information on the vehicle that Winston's group had used. Reluctantly, and wanting to avoid a scene, Mayhew agreed to her demands. Back with Winston while he searched for a spy, Miles enlisted Yin to carry out a different plan. They went to a parking lot to steal a vehicle. Yin was to keep watch while Miles infiltrated the area. When he had found himself a car and went outside, he realized that the gate leading out had been closed. The guards grew suspicious and ordered him to get out of the vehicle. Fortunately, Yin acted quickly, slamming the car into the gate and crashing through to save Miles's failing plan. In another turn of events, on a rooftop surrounded by flickering torches, Karen, Cormac's bodyguard, was writing a letter to his father. Sitting with Charon was a musician, and the two were talking. The musician informed Charon that he had just received an invitation to join a prestigious music school, so he would be leaving soon. He also suggested that Charon should come along, but Charon replied that his father had worked hard to send him to Cormac. While things weren't perfect there, it was much safer than back home. Charon had a plan. Once he gained Cormac's complete trust, he would bring his father to live with him. His loyalty to Cormac was unwavering. However, the musician warned Charon to reconsider because Cormac was a ruthless man. He would never do anything unless it benefited him, and he wasn't someone who kept his promises, so Charon shouldn't trust him too much. Meanwhile, across the street, Winston and Jenkins were using binoculars to surveil Cormac's hotel, plotting how to take him down. They quickly spotted Charon and a musician on the premises, locking their sights on Charon as a potential ally. The next morning, Charon visited the post office and received a letter from his father. The letter detailed a recent riot at home, leaving their house in ruins, which deeply worried Charon. Sensing his distress, a friend of his suggested they go somewhere to unwind. However, in the hustle, Charon accidentally left his father's letter behind. Seizing the opportunity, Lou stealthily approached and extracted the letter from the envelope, leaving only the empty casing behind. In another scene, a young boy from a Chinese gang threw a rock, shattering the window of Lou's karate class. Unable to contain her anger, Lou chased after him. Despite his quick pace, the boy couldn't escape her pursuit. Just as Lou aimed to teach him a lesson, a group of thugs jumped out to confront her. However, being the daughter of a martial arts instructor, Lou quickly dispatched the gangsters with ease. Frustrated by his inept underlings, the Chinese gang leader appeared, demanding that Lou allow him to set up a drug vending machine outside her store. Lou stood firm against his demands, refusing to acquiesce to his proposal. As a final act of defiance, she smashed the drug vending machine he had placed outside. Back in the present, Winston carefully analyzed Charon's father's letter. After his thorough study, he arranged a meeting with Charon on a bus. He even paid for the entire trip to serve his own agenda. During the bus ride, Winston shared a story from his past. He recounted how he and Frankie used to collect money for Cormac, but Frankie had the idea to skim a little off the top. Initially, everything went smoothly until one night when they fell asleep in their car. They were jolted awake when someone smashed the car's window window and dragged them out. To their surprise, instead of facing a beating for stealing, Cormac had shown concern for the worn shoes of the Winston brothers. What seemed like a kind gesture was, in reality, a clever manipulation that ensnared them further in Cormac's grip. Winston warned Charon that Cormac was employing the same tactics with him. Cormac pretended to be a benevolent figure, but his true intention was to bind loyalty, turning his followers into mere tools for his own purposes. Winston emphasized that he was there to help Charon escape Cormac's influence. At the Continental Hotel, Cormac was meeting with the musician who had come to say goodbye before leaving for Iceland to study music. Cormac appeared delighted and pretended to congratulate the musician. He asked the musician to play a song as a display of loyalty before he left. The musician, without suspicion, immediately complied. However, while he was playing for Cormac, the latter struck him from behind with his golf club, knocking the musician out cold. When Charon returned to the hotel, he found the musician's lifeless body. Cormac explained that the musician had stolen from him before leaving, and that's why he was punished. Charon also informed Cormac that there were people who wanted to kill him, and today they had approached Charon, trying to persuade him to work for them. Cormac was pleased with Charon's honesty and loyalty, but when Charon asked what the musician had stolen, Cormac said that the musician had intended to steal Charon, his most trusted assistant, and the price for that was death. Meanwhile, after talking to Charon, Winston returned to Lou's dojo to train with everyone on how to attack Cormac's weapons cache. However, they soon realized something important. They didn't know who held the key to the weapons cache at the Continental Hotel. Winston said it was undoubtedly Cormac who held the key, as he had many enemies, and the weapons cache was his armor, protecting his life. Therefore, he would never trust anyone with it. The more they discussed, the more they realized that this mission was like walking straight into death, especially with so few people. Since Cormac's weapons cache was enormous, equivalent to an entire army, to defeat Cormac, they would need a large force, and only Maisie's army could meet that requirement. However, to this point, Winston still hadn't received her approval. His uncertain answer caused doubts among the group, and they were reluctant to risk their lives on a mission with no guarantees. Winston, upon hearing this, became very angry. He told them that from the very beginning, the mission had been an impossible one, and there was no guarantee of success. If anyone was scared, they could back out now, and it wouldn't be too late. Before the plan had even been set in motion, internal conflict arose, and the group members, without saying a word, went their separate ways. Lou went home and was preparing several crates of C4 explosives with Lemmy. Just then, Detective KD walked in, wanting them to show her what they had just brought in. But Lou, being a seasoned member of the underworld, wasn't intimidated by her threats. Before leaving, KD made sure to leave her business card with Lou and told her to notify her if she saw Winston. As KD left the dojo, she was being followed by Mayhew. He had never understood why KD had been so focused on tracking Frankie, and after Frankie's death, she had shifted her focus to Winston. Meanwhile, Uncle Jenkins had started taking action by visiting a building near the Continental Hotel. Jenkins pretended to be a repairman and entered a woman's house. While the homeowner wasn't paying attention, he pulled out a fake rat and claimed there were many rats in the house, offering to help her get rid of them. This trick successfully deceived the homeowner, giving Jenkins the perfect position to act as a sniper. That night, Lou had an argument with Miles. When she noticed her brother constantly going against the things their father had done when he was alive, Lou confronted him and demanded an explanation. However, Miles disagreed. He told Lou that it was better for her not to know the truth. In response to what her brother said, Lou began to have doubts about their father, wondering if he was really the person she had always believed him to be. Meanwhile, Winston went to meet Maisie to convince her to join him. Not only that, but Winston also gifted her a large bank, the same one where his mother had worked as a janitor and had been humiliated. After becoming successful, Winston spared no expense to buy it back and cleanse the shame his mother had endured. While it was now only a small bank, it was a symbol that with dedication, anything could succeed. As for Cormac, after hearing from Charon that Winston had met him on the bus and had convinced Charon to join his side, Cormac sent a peculiar pair of assassins along with Charon to track down the bus and gather information about Winston. However, the bus driver knew nothing about Winston, so the assassins ruthlessly shot him dead. After leaving her house, Lou noticed that someone was following her. She then went to a phone booth to call Winston's hotel and inform him that she was being followed. But as soon as Lou hung up, the person following her appeared outside, and it was none other than Police Mayhew. Unaware of who he was dealing with, Lou attacked the opposing forces. After a fierce struggle, Officer Mayhew was left unconscious. Unable to discern his surroundings, Lou then searched Mayhew's belongings and discovered he was a police officer. Prioritizing her escape, Lou quickly fled the scene before authorities could apprehend her. Meanwhile, at the Continental Hotel, Cormac was seething with rage over the missing minting machine, which threatened his power. His frustration boiled over when a woman dared to impose conditions on him. As the keeper of the weapons cache, he was prepared to destroy everything if pushed to the brink. Mayhew, regaining consciousness witness after Lou's attack, set out to find KD. He confronted her, revealing that he understood why she was so determined to locate Frankie's brothers. He had rummaged through her home searching for clues. Angered by his intrusion, KD forcibly ejected Mayhew from her house. Later, Lou met Winston and informed him that 2 police officers had come looking for him that day. She questioned him about the secrets he was hiding that warranted such attention. Just as Lou's inquiries intensified, the hotel of Winston welcomed 2 new guests, the twin assassins, who aimed their guns at the receptionist, demanding information about Winston before heading upstairs. As Winston and Lou argued, the assassins burst in. Despite his lack of combat skills, he seized an opportunity to escape when the assassins were distracted. When Winston made it to the hotel lobby, he encountered KD. Initially intending to pass each other by, KD suddenly recognized him. In an instant, she drew her gun, intent on taking him down. Just as KD was about to confront Winston, assassins arrived, shooting KD and capturing Winston. When Lou descended to the lobby, Winston was already gone, and the police were closing in, urging her to leave the scene as quickly as possible. However, KD was not dead. Once the assassins left, she regained consciousness and discovered a gold coin ticket granting her access to a room in the Continental Hotel. Meanwhile, Cormac wasted no time interrogating Winston about the missing minting machine. Winston had no idea where his brother had hidden it, much like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Frustrated by Winston's stubbornness, Cormac ordered his men to prepare to drop Winston from a height as a form of intimidation. Before Cormac could execute his plan, a bullet whizzed in from a distance, striking down one of his henchmen. Cormac narrowly escaped death, but realized that Winston's capture was part of a larger scheme. The shocking twist came when he discovered that Charon, his most loyal bodyguard, had betrayed him, turning against him in a dramatic 180-degree shift. Cormac was not about to let his lifetime of work fall into the hands of his enemies, refusing to hand over the key to the weapons cache. Charon, paralyzed by fear, hesitated to pull the trigger, allowing Cormac to slip away through a secret tunnel. Outside, Winston's team began to mobilize, splitting up to search for Cormac. Ian and Miles drove directly to the weapons cache, while Lemmy monitored the situation from the observation room, keeping tabs on the unfolding events at the hotel. Meanwhile, Lou remained at home, unaware of the chaos surrounding her. The Chinese man returned to the dojo, revealing the dark truth about Lou's father. He was not the heroic figure she had believed him to be. Instead, he was a hired killer. To prove his point, he handed Lou a custom-designed gun meant for her father's assassinations. The revelation left Lou in shock, stripping her of all motivation. She allowed the gangsters to invade her home, wreaking havoc without resistance. Inside the Continental Hotel, Winston and Charon finally reached the vicinity of the weapons cache, only to find themselves surrounded by Cormac's forces. Outnumbered and outgunned, they were quickly overpowered. Just as Cormac stepped forward to reclaim control, believing he had secured victory, he was caught off guard. What he thought was a straightforward win turned out to be a trap set by Mazzy's men, who had infiltrated his ranks long ago. Cormac never expected to be cornered like this, and he was furious. But in the face of this overwhelming situation, Cormac could do nothing. He pulled out a necklace with the key to the weapons cache, but instead of using it to unlock the cache, he snapped it and cut off the power, plunging everything into darkness. The only light that remained was the faint glow from gunfire. Amid the chaos, it was unclear who was alive and who was dead. Outside, Lou had blown up the karate school with a C4 explosive. All the thugs and the Chinese owner were obliterated. Back at the Continental Hotel, after a brutal fight in the dark, the electricity was restored. Only Charon and Winston survived. They began to search for Cormac. However, as they were searching, KD appeared. She aimed a gun at Winston's head and ordered him to follow her, letting Charon escape. Meanwhile, Cormac was not dead. He had escaped and made his way to the control room, a place known only to him. After being dragged by KD, Winston was taken to a room. He still didn't understand why KD had been trying to kill him over and over, especially since he had never met her. KD then revealed that she was the little girl from the family who had been burned to death by Frankie's Molotov cocktail years ago. Now that Frankie had paid for his crimes, KD believed that since Winston was Frankie's younger brother, he was also an accomplice. Therefore, Winston must die to pay for the sins of his past. It was then that Winston realized that KD was the only surviving member of that family, and it was his reckless actions that had caused the deaths of her entire family. At that moment, Winston admitted that it wasn't Frankie who set the fire, it was him. Winston apologized to KD, explaining that he had been too young at the time and didn't foresee the consequences of his actions. After hearing this, KD poured gasoline over Winston's head and lit him on fire, intending for him to experience the same fiery death that her family had endured. Winston, accepting his impending death, closed his eyes and prepared to face the flames. Just as KD was about to ignite the gasoline, a bullet whizzed through the air, striking her hand. It was a shot from from Uncle Jenkins, positioned across the street. Seizing the moment, Winston rushed to KD's side to tend to her injury. He offered her a painkiller, but KD immediately refused. He urged her to stay put, promising to return and rescue her. Meanwhile, Uncle Jenkins continued his calm assault on the enemies, but his focus was disrupted when the homeowner unexpectedly returned. With no time to react, Jenkins tied her up, engaging in casual conversation as he dispatched foes. His odd yet cheerful demeanor made the situation strangely light-hearted amidst the chaos. Back at the Continental Hotel, Cormac had reached the control room and used the PA system to announce a bounty of $2 million for anyone who could deliver Winston's head. The promise of such a large reward sent the assassins into a frenzy, turning on each other in a desperate bid to claim the prize. In the midst of this chaos, Winston reunited with Charon. Charon led him to a room adorned with a prominent painting. He explained that his assistance wasn't motivated by Winston's words, but by his past connection to Frankie, who had treated him well. Out of gratitude, Charon wanted to repay the favor. With that, Charon pulled down the painting. Inside was a small weapons cache that he had hidden earlier. With the weapons they acquired, the two of them confidently went outside to eliminate their enemies. Along with that, Winston promised to bring Charon's father here after they took control of the Continental. Meanwhile, the twin assassins were ruthlessly killing without hesitation, and all their actions were being monitored by Yin from above. She then approached both of them and led them to a secluded location. Knowing that she wasn't a match for them, Yin had made preparations in advance. She had a bomb implanted inside her and a detonator in her hand. Just as Yin was about to press the button, Miles accidentally witnessed the scene and rushed to stop her from taking such a reckless action. Miles told her that Frankie was dead, but she was still alive and had no right to act so foolishly. His words made Yin reconsider, and she resumed the battle. Cormac's forces suffered significant losses, but Winston's team also faced their first casualty when Lemmy used a mail tube to send explosives to various rooms to eliminate Cormac's men and the assassins hunting for Winston's head. He took down quite a few. Meanwhile, in the room where Miles and the bizarre assassin were fighting, a package of explosives exploded, hitting them both. However, Lemmy was also struck by a grenade thrown back at him, leading to his demise. After being hit by the explosives, Miles was lucky to survive, but the bizarre assassin was not killed, so the two of them continued to fight. Miles was no match for the assassin, and after a few blows, he was taken down. Just as the assassin was about to finish off Miles, a hand appeared. It was Lou. After blowing up the dojo, Lou had come to the Continental Hotel to help everyone. Together, they fought the assassin, who was overwhelmed and unable to counter their attacks. The assassin proved to be incredibly resilient, wielding a simple stick with unmatched agility, overpowering both Lou and Miles. Just when it seemed defeat was imminent, he broke the stick in half and stabbed Miles in the shoulder, draining his strength. As they faced what felt like their final moments, a young Chinese boy appeared, tossing Lou her father's forgotten gun. Armed with this unexpected weapon, Lou regained her resolve and managed to take down the relentless assassin. Meanwhile, the remaining female assassin pursued Yin, cornering her in the hotel's courtyard. Their duel was intense, with neither backing down. There were moments when it seemed Yin had the upper hand, landing critical blows. Yet, the assassin's tenacity allowed her to fight back, pushing Yin to her limits. In a climactic struggle, Yin managed to stab the assassin in the chest, but the assassin retaliated by dragging Yin into the water. They thrashed about like fish out of water, fighting for survival. Ultimately, the assassin managed to climb ashore, but she was now tethered to Yin's explosives. Without hesitation, Yin activated the detonator, annihilating the assassin in a fiery explosion. Back in the communication room before Lemmy's demise, Winston and Charon rushed in to find him gravely wounded. With his last strength, Lemmy handed them C4 explosives, closing his eyes for the final time. After bidding farewell to their fallen comrade, Winston and Charon carefully distributed the explosives throughout the communication pipes, aiming to take out their enemies efficiently. However, they soon discovered that the pipe leading to the control room had been destroyed, preventing them from delivering the explosives there. At that moment, Charon thought of a place that could lead them to the control room: the restaurant elevator. It was the only place that could take them to Cormac. Without hesitation, the two of them quickly moved toward the kitchen. Cormac, upon realizing they were close to reaching the control room, became fearful. His forces had been reduced to almost nothing. Meanwhile, when he sought help from the powerful forces behind him, they turned their backs on him. Cormac found himself trapped with no way out. In his frustration, he killed the technical staff in the control room, the only people left who could help him. Afterward, he decided that if he couldn't keep the hotel, he would destroy it, ensuring that those trying to take it over would be buried with it. So Cormac activated the self-destruct mode of the hotel and ran toward an escape route. After he left, Winston and Charon arrived at the scene. They realized that the self-destruct countdown was only a matter of minutes. Through the security camera, cameras, they discovered the path Cormac was taking to escape and realized that if they didn't catch him, they would be buried with the hotel. So, Charon stayed behind to guide Winston through the cameras, while Winston pursued Cormac. When Winston reached the tunnel, Cormac unexpectedly appeared from behind and attacked him. At that moment, Cormac admitted that when Winston and Frankie were little, it was he who had ordered Frankie to set fire to the fashion store, framing them for the crime and ensuring that Winston and Frankie could never become righteous men. Everything Cormac said was overheard by KD. Now she knew that the man responsible for her family's death was none other than that despicable man. As Cormac prepared to strike the final blow against Winston, KD intervened. With unwavering resolve, she aimed her gun at him and fired. The first bullet struck Cormac, leaving him momentarily stunned. Before he could comprehend why KD sought his life, the second bullet found its mark in his head, ending his reign of terror. He fell without ever knowing the full extent of his actions. After Cormac's demise, Winston braced for KD to turn her weapon on him, but instead, she lowered her gun, sparing his life. In that moment, she seemed to understand that Frankie's actions had not stemmed from malice. They were victims of Cormac's manipulation, just as she had been. As the chaos unfolded, a private train car began to move towards the hotel, meant to whisk Cormac away as the self-destruct sequence neared its end. Yet, Winston refused to escape alone. He couldn't abandon his comrades and loved ones still trapped within. In a moment of grim determination, he severed Cormac's arm, taking it back to halt the self-destruct process. With the threat neutralized, the atmosphere shifted, the hotel was safe, and everyone rejoiced in their hard-won victory. Winston turned to Charon, suggesting he could return home to his father and live a normal life. But Charon chose to stay, feeling that the Continental had become his second home. As the group gathered to celebrate with drinks, a masked woman approached Winston, ready to lay down the law and assert her influence as the new proprietor of the hotel. However, Winston did not hesitate and shot at her 2 bullets to make it clear that from now on, no one like her would ever be able to give him orders again. The coin minting machine was now in his hands. Winston had found it in the car where he and Frankie used to sleep as children. However, Winston did not want to keep it. He handed it over to Maisie as a thank you for her help during the battle with Cormac. At the same time, it was also a clever move, as the underground forces were always lurking, wanting to overthrow Winston. Maisie would serve as a shield to help him stand strong. Although Cormac had been defeated, Winston knew that this was just the beginning of a larger war.